Yeah, welcome in. Welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. Got a pretty interesting show for you here today on this Throwback Thursday. Going to give flowers to a guy who really deserves it and probably doesn't get him as much as he should, the one and only Pistol Pete Maravich. But before we get to that, you know what time it is. If you're here on YouTube and you haven't already, please make sure you go ahead, click that like, that subscribe, that notification bell. Make sure you're kept up to date whenever we drop new content on the channel. If you want the audio-only version of the podcast, open up your audio podcast platform, hit the search bar, type in the Format Podcast, and we should come right up. If you're enjoying the content, make sure you give us that like, that 5-star review, and drop a comment. All that stuff helps us rise in the algorithm, helps us find more sports fans, helps more sports fans find us. And finally, make sure you write it down, put it in your phone, set an alarm, do whatever you got to do to remember. Saturday nights at 7 p.m. we are live here on the Format Podcast, and we'll give you the opportunity to call in, talk to us, get at me. I love it. I can't wait. All right, so like I mentioned in the intro, we're going to talk today about the one and only Pistol Pete. And, you know, Pistol Pete was special, man, because I guess we always want to know kind of what was the genesis of the things that we see in the modern era of sports, right? If you want to talk about like the gunslinger quarterbacks in football, maybe you say you got a guy like a Dan Marino, and then you got a Brett Favre, and then you got an Aaron Rodgers, and now you got a Pat Mahomes, and you kind of can see the progression going down the line in that way. But when it comes to basketball, sometimes it's a little harder to identify. And maybe if you go back far enough into the mid to late 50s, you see probably the first guy to really be that guy, at least on the NBA level. And that's Bob Cousy, a New York City guy. They used to call him the Houdini of the hardwood. Did a lot of the, at least at that time, fancy ball handling tricks that kind of laid the groundwork and paved the way for what you see today. And then going forward, getting into the 70s, you saw more guys having some more flash and flair. But really, the guy who probably, I guess, really made it popular and was super influential was Pistol Pete. And you can see him here. And one of the things I think about when I think about Pistol Pete, well, I guess statistically, I look at the 44 points a game in college, and we'll get to that in a bit. But in the NBA, I think about he was a pretty good shooter. The percentages won't show because, again, back then defense was played totally differently and blah, blah, blah. And the analytics weren't, part of the deal. But he was probably one of the first guys who had really elite range. Obviously, he played the vast majority of his career without the benefit of a three-point line, so we wouldn't know what it really was. But he was one of the first guys that you saw in terms of, consistently going behind the back, really outstanding passer and ball handler on the fast break, breaking traps with his dribble. He was a guy that you would see him a lot, just doing amazing things in terms of the crossover in front of the body. A lot of times, like when you go back to Bob Cousy and whatnot, even though he was an outstanding ball handler for the time, a lot of times you'd see the guys back then, even the great ball handlers, turn their whole body instead of crossing over in front of them. Now, you can look at that and say that's a defense mechanism to protect the basketball, but realistically, guys just didn't have the crossover yet. And if they did, they couldn't do a lot of that stuff because most coaches wouldn't allow you to play that way. But as you saw, man, Pistol Pete was, he was amazing. And I know there's some viewers of this channel that are old enough to have actually seen Pistol Pete and watched him play and know how special he is. But so let's start it off. Pistol Pete's dad, Press Maravich, he was a coach and a former professional basketball player. He was born to Serbian immigrants in Pennsylvania, and then he had his son who would end up being Pistol Pete. And so from the time he was, a lot younger, he had Pistol Pete really drilling when it came to basketball. One, because he wanted him to be the best player he could be, but two, he came up with a whole bunch of different and creative drills so that young Pistol Pete wouldn't get bored. So this was kind of interesting. So let's hear some of what Pistol Pete had to say, and then we'll get back to that. We'll talk a little bit about his college career, the NBA, and also some of the influence that he had on one of arguably the greatest playmaker the game has ever seen. So let's check that out.
Ever since I was perhaps 12 years old, Roy, I threw a behind-the-back bounce pass during a junior varsity game between a defender's legs. I looked around and I saw the fans and how excited they really got, and that was back in 1959. And I just saw the excitement of entertainment that you could bring to people and that they would really enjoy that. And so I wanted that. It was like a drug inducement to me, and that's the way I'd learned the game anyway. My dad had developed so many different types of creative fundamentals to keep me from boredom. And so, because I played 6 to 10 hours a day, every day, 90 days during the summer. And, I'd do incredible things. I would dribble blindfolded in the house. I would take my basketball to bed with me. I'd lay there after my mother kissed me, tuck me in. I would sit there and shoot the ball up in the air and say fingertip control, backspin, follow through.
Is it true that your dad would drive you to school every morning and right alongside the car you dribble?
Well, not every day, but that was
sometime.
But sometimes he would get me. The very first time we went out on a road that was straight, and he told me to put myself out the side of the car and dribble, and I told him, I said, Dad, you're nuts. He said, just do as I say. And I didn't really know why he did that, but I know now. And the reason is because he was building levels of confidence in me.
So, I mean, just imagine somebody drilling you to the point of telling you to hang out of the side of the car window being open and dribble as he drove slowly. Like that not only creates an incredible amount of ball control, but like Pistol Pete said, confidence that if you can do that, nobody's going to come and take the rock from you. Right now, I would also assume that Pistol Pete probably had some, because of all the amazing things he could do, he probably had some turnover issues throughout his career. But man, just going back and doing the research for this show and watching a lot of the stuff that Pistol Pete was doing, it was crazy. And it really is reminiscent of a lot of the stuff that we're seeing now. So Pistol Pete, obviously we know high school star and all that. Then he goes to LSU, Louisiana State University. His dad was the head coach there, and he averages, well, back then when he went to college, freshmen were not allowed to play varsity. So he only got 3 years of varsity for which his stats were kept. Now, a crazy thing, his very first game as a freshman, and that was obviously junior varsity, he scored 50 points, right? So we know that he could light it up. But for his varsity career at LSU, he averaged 44 points a game, and I think he's had like just over 3,600 career points. And for the longest, that was the record until this past season when Caitlin Clark broke it. Now, this is something I want to say, and this is something I thought about when everyone was carrying on about Caitlin Clark breaking the record. And one of the things that I always talk about, if you know this show, is I talk about degree of difficulty and people, it being hard to compare across errors because the rules and the conditions aren't the same, right? Now, let me say this first and foremost. I'm taking nothing from Caitlin Clark. I love watching her play. I think she's incredible. I think she's exciting. But when we talk about her breaking Pistol Pete's record, I think that's not fair. Pistol Pete only got 3 years in which to set his record. Caitlin Clark did it in 4. And the other part of that too is, excuse me, Pistol Pete did that in 3 years and he averaged 44 a game. And so here's an interesting thing. He didn't have a 3-point line. So there's that. So again, like, did she really break the record? Technically, yeah. But this is why I always say, like, we should start, we shouldn't just put records out there like that. We should start, not putting disclaimers on it, but we should start paying attention to the conditions under which records were set and broken, right? Like LeBron James recently broke Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's all-time scoring record, and now he's the all-time leading scorer in the history of professional basketball. Incredible accomplishment, by the way, LeBron. But even with that said, for the first 10 years of Kareem's career, he didn't have the benefit of threes. Now, as a center back then, would he have shot threes? Almost positively not. But the fact is, he didn't have the opportunity. Should he have wanted to, or should a coach have said, wait a minute, if we develop this, it could be a weapon? But, that's an argument for another day in terms of comparing across errors. Now, this to me, in terms of Pistol Pete, was an amazing, amazing stat, right? So we know he averaged 44.5 points a game for his college career over 3 years playing varsity at LSU. But the wild part is LSU former head coach Dale Brown, who I believe he coached Shaquille O'Neal at LSU, he looked at the shot chart. Every shot Pistol Pete took in college, he measured out where those shots were from on the floor, and he did the math and came up with it that if there was a 3-point line when Pistol Pete played college basketball, Pistol Pete would have averaged 57 points per game in his college career with an estimated 13 3-point makes per game. That doesn't even make sense. Like, how do you even compute that, right? That makes no sense. Now, with that said, for all that scoring Pistol Pete was doing, let me be objective here. A lot of people say that certain players are stat padding, putting up points and putting up these stats. We heard about Russell Westbrook when he was averaging triple-double. We hear it about LeBron James now with the incredible numbers that he's putting up late into his career. We hear a lot of things about stat padding and compiling. And if we're real, you would have to look up Pistol Pete's college team to be able to name another player on that LSU roster. We also know that his father was the coach on that roster, and we also know that he took a tremendous amount of shots, and his career field goal percentage in college was just under 43.8%. So even though he had deadly range and he was probably the first really good deep shooter, his field goal percentage not great, and you'll see that as well in the NBA. Regardless, though, an absolutely incredible player, right? So then he goes on to the NBA, and another crazy thing there is it was among so when Dr. J came out of college, I think there was this whole thing of ABA versus NBA, and they were fighting over his rights and all that. And Dr. J was actually in Atlanta, and he was going to play with the Hawks, and he played 2 games with Pistol Pete. And Pistol Pete talks about what an incredible time that was. And I think in one of those games he had 14 assists or something like that. So, we know that Pistol Pete, even though the assist numbers, if you look at him, I think he's 5.5 assists per game for his career. The assist numbers aren't crazy, but Pistol Pete was an elite passer in terms of all the things he can do. Now imagine him playing for any extended amount of time with Dr. J. That's alley oops all day, right? And when he shoots the long J and he misses, well, Dr. J early in his career was a rebounding terror. He was going to grab that and put it right back. But, things go how they go. And unfortunately, we didn't get an opportunity to see that. There was another situation, and I'm digressing for Pistol Pete a second, but just, going back around this time when Dr. J first came, there was an opportunity for him to have played in Milwaukee, and he would have been playing with Oscar Robertson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That would have been absurd. That might have been the greatest big three ever. But again, things go how they go, and Dr. J's career went how it went, and so on. But back to Pistol Pete. So Pistol Pete got busy in college. Then he comes into the league, and he averages 24.2 points per game for his career. Now, I know a lot of people may be thinking, based on today's numbers, oh, that's not that great. He's not a great scorer, which is ridiculous, right? Because there's a lot of people who would say Carmelo Anthony is a better player than him, right? And hey, that's fine, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and let's look it up just to verify, Carmelo Anthony actually has a lower scoring average for his career than Pistol. There you go, 22.5. And most people would say that he's the better scorer between him and Pistol Pete. So, errors make a difference and so on and so forth. But regardless, Pistol Pete, absolutely crazy. His career field goal percentage is only 44%. Now there's a lot of elite players who have been right around that range. I think that's Kobe, not saying that he's as good as Kobe, but that's Kobe. I think that's Allen Iverson. So a lot of elite big time players and scorers, when defense was different and the game was different, analytics again didn't have so much of a hold on the game, had that lower shooting percentage. But yeah, Pistol Pete, man, just special. And I mentioned it earlier. One of the guys that he had a tremendous influence on was not arguably, in my estimation, the greatest passer of all time, the greatest floor general of all time, and that's the one and only Magic Johnson. Let's hear what he had to say about Pistol Pete.
Boy, could he play basketball, and could he entertain you. The no-look passes, the dribble the ball and then pat it with one hand. That's where I saw that from Pistol Pete. That's where I got it from.
So you hear that. Magic says, he saw that. And realistically, when Pistol Pete was in his prime, early to mid 70s, that's when Magic was coming up, right? That's when Magic would have been around 8th grade in high school and all that. That's when Pistol Pete would have been in his prime. So Magic is seeing all that. He's seeing all those crazy passes on the fast break, the behind the backs and the through the legs and the long bounce passes and the drop offs to the big in the lane and all that. So yeah, Pistol Pete, just tremendous influence on the game. And then obviously we know Magic influenced some of the other bigger guards coming down the pike. And so, you look at your Lucas today, and you look at your Birds prior to that, and maybe Pistol Pete was a guy prior to that. And so, just wanted to take a day here, not take a day here, but take an opportunity here on this Throwback Thursday to give props and give shout outs once again to, the one and only Pistol Pete Maravich. Again, the guy he was legit. He was legit. All right. So that's all I got for you today. You know what time it is. Make sure you check in with us Saturday night. Make sure if you haven't already, you like and subscribe to the channel. And yeah, I'm out. Peace.